Episode number 157 with Zach Elwood. Welcome to the Heads Up Poker Podcast. This is Steve Barton, and thank you for tuning in. This week we have poker author Zach Elwood. He's written several books on poker tells. He's written Reading Poker Tells, Verbal Poker Tells, Exploiting Poker Tells, and if you are a visual learner like me, he even has a video series, which is awesome. You can watch this happen with whole cards. It's Mike Caro, modern time. He's also got a lot of free Poker Tells information that you can get, and we will tell you how to get that. And Zach has been generous, and we have an extra special treat for one lucky listener. I'm going to tell you how to get that. A lifetime membership to Zach's video series. So stay tuned, and I'll tell you how to get that. Zach Elwood, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I always like to start with, just kind of tell everyone about yourself. You're up in Portland. How'd you get your start in poker? Family
Sure.
man, single, all that. Just kind of.
Sure, yeah. A little bit about me. Let's see. I got into poker in college. This was like back in 2000. I'm a pretty old guy, I guess, in the poker world. So, I played in college, and then afterwards, around like 2003, I moved to Albuquerque and started playing for a living there because I had met some people who were more into poker than I was there, and got me playing higher stakes at the casino and online and stuff.
And how old were you then?
This was like, I guess I was, mid to late 20s or something.
Okay.
Like 15 years ago. So I'm like 40 now.
Okay.
Mid 20s. Yeah, so I played for a living for like 4 years. And then since then, just been semi-pro. And how I got into poker tells was, I was always interested in the psychology side of the game. And always thought there could be, even after I had been playing for a couple of years, I thought there could be better books on poker tells, better resources.
And you got your degree in psychology, right?
Oh, no degree. No, I have a degree in video and film. Yeah, I'm just more of an armchair, amateur psychologist. Always been interested in and read a lot of books on psychology in general, and just interested in it. And that was what drew me into poker originally. Even though when you have that initial concept where you think poker is all about tells and reading people, and then you learn that's just a small part of it. But that was what initially drew me into the game. Was I took notes on people in college, like the friends I played with, and had a notebook of like stuff they would do.
Okay.
So yeah, long been interested in it, an amateur student. And then, so then after playing a few years, I was like, why isn't there a better resource on this? Because I knew about stuff that wasn't talked about, and I talked to other experienced players who, said similar things. And, so I always thought there could be a better book. But at the time it was like the poker boom. So I thought, there's going to be some famous player who writes a book on this, and why would I do it? I'm nobody. And then flash forward, to 2010 or so. And there still hadn't been what I thought was a good book written on the subject. And I was just like, I guess I'll do it myself. So that was how, it kind of came into being. It wasn't so much that I thought I was a genius about poker tells. It was more like I knew about stuff that I knew other experienced poker players knew about, but hadn't been talked about in a formal way, So that was what led to that. And then, people gave me a good response to that. So I was encouraged to write more and do more work.
Okay.
Okay.
And you played from 2003 to 2007 about? And
yeah, there. And then
you played like 20-40 limit, 5-10 no limit?
Yeah, this was back in Albuquerque when the poker scene was at its most active, like during the poker boom. And there was some good no limit games. There was some good, 15, 30, 20, 40 limit games. There was some good online games. All that stuff.
And is that where you really kind of took your interest in psychology and translated it to the poker table?
Yeah, I just, because it was what drew me into the game, even though you quickly realize it's a small part of poker when you take it seriously. That was what initially drew me into the game, and then I continued to be interested by that part of it. And but as I like to tell everybody, there's people who are fairly new to poker. have this kind of, sexy idea that it's all about tells and bluffing and, um, things like that, the more sexy aspect of poker, when in reality, it's mostly just having a really sound strategy.
Yeah, yeah. I've always kind of prided myself in my ability to read people at the table. And after going through your videos and listening to your book, I read your book when it first came out, Reading Poker Tells, and then I listened to it again last week, and I realized that I really don't know as much about tells as I thought I did. And I'm not as good at reading people as I thought I was. Something you mentioned at the beginning of your book that I thought was really interesting, because I believe the same thing, is you said everything means something. If you had infinite knowledge on someone and their biometrics, you could know their hand exactly. And you said you would know if they've got deuce deuce or 3-3. And I think that's true. I feel different when I look down at a pair of kings than I do at 8-3 offsuit. And
Yeah, and that part was, that part of the book, obviously, like I said in the book, you can never actually know that in the real world, but it was more just a way to say, theoretically, there are indicators. If we knew every single thing about a person and had an infinite measure of their background and how they looked at, every single stat for them for every time they looked at every card, or every hand. So it was just a way to set up the book in the terms of there is a wealth of information out there. We may only be able to capture a very small amount of it, which is, true for almost always, but I believe the information's out there. It's just a matter of, finding ways to get the most of it,
Yeah, I wonder if in the future we'll have glasses that can read like thermal imaging or things like that, and you can tell when a person's heartbeat is faster. Who
Right.
knows?
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? I mean,
If
I
you
think
could
that's
know
stuff.
that information, I believe you could more accurately assess their hand.
Yeah, like if somebody did, I've always thought there could be a really cool study where you hook somebody up to all these indicators and then stage an actual poker game, which has never been done that I know of. But hook them up to all these biometric readings and then get a really long sample size for every single thing. Their heartbeat, there's also other you know conductance kind of things, which is what they read in skin conductance kind of measures and stuff like that.
You could hook them up to like an EKG or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
all that stuff, brain waves, who knows.
yeah, yeah.
The point is, it's the information. There's a lot of information out there, even though we may be only to capture less than 1% of it or whatever.
Jesus, how could we set up a program like that? That would be really interesting. You just get 3 players, you hook them up to that stuff, and you have them play for 4 hours, and you take each individual and you put them on, for lack of a better word, a graph, and you do the same thing with the other people when they have similar hands, and compare and contrast.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun. I mean, I've thought about some studies like that, and I also thought it'd be cool. I don't have the Apple Watch, but I thought it'd be cool to how the Apple Watch can measure heartbeat, and so you can. I think if I had an Apple Watch, I'd be measuring my heartbeat at the poker table and seeing what it's like when I bluff versus when I don't and stuff. I think it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. We did a study at work. I'm a fire captain, and we did a study where we basically did that. We hooked ourselves up to a thing that measured, I think it was only our heartbeat. It might have been a couple other things. Oh, no, I think it was breathing, too. It was this really uncomfortable shirt that, was, 3 sizes too small. It was a boy's small, and it just hugged every inch of you. And, and then it had this little battery pack on the side with a reader that it read us for 24 hours. And I had that shirt on, and I was sitting down at the computer, and then a call came in, and my heart rate went from 55 to 90.
Whoa. Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And ironically, the call wasn't even for the truck that I was on. It was for another unit in the same station. And my heart rate still went up that high. And I'd been doing this at that point for probably 5 or 6 years, so this wasn't new.
Right. That's the
interesting
thing. I mean, because poker players. I mean, I've talked to a lot of experienced poker players, and and it's often said that you never really get used to the excitement of. I mean, a lot of people don't get used to the excitement of bluffing. Like you could have been doing this, for a long time, and you still get that rush in big spots.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to get rid of, which is why one of the reasons they say, like less experienced players are capable of having a high heart rate, a fast pulse for like betting, value hands and betting bluffs because they're excited in both spots. Whereas like more experienced players tend to just get the blood pumping in big bluff spots,
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons, a lot of people wear scarves and stuff at the, the big tournaments, they see a lot of scarves.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons. Yeah.
Do you wear glasses?
No, oh, you mean sunglasses?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I like the idea of them. I always think they come off as so unfriendly, and I'm not really a tournament player. I've only played a handful of tournaments, so in cash games, I just like to have a really, friendly vibe, and so I've basically never worn sunglasses. I've worn them in a couple tournaments I've played, but
okay, I'm mostly a tournament player. I wear them with a hat.
Yeah, I like them.
I have noticed it does affect the friendly dynamic because I'm pretty sociable and I'm the guy at the table that wants to learn where everyone's from and like that, But initially, that it does kind of put up a bit of a barrier. And I've even come back on break and left my hat and sunglasses on the table, and I sit down and everyone looks at me like, "Who are you and why are you sitting in that guy's seat?" And then when I put the stuff on, it's like I'm a different person.
Terminator. Yeah, I think it's fine for tournaments because I think in tournaments people are generally, more on edge in the first place. But in cash games, you can have a lot of times there's a more friendly, laid back vibe, which is good to foster. But
yes.
I think I definitely like sunglasses, because I think the best thing about them is that you can watch people and they don't know you're watching them. I think that's the greatest thing,
It's so awesome because I can sit there and, I've been doing this long enough. I can stack and count chips without having to look at them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can pull my chips off and start stacking, but I'm looking across the table at the other guy to see how he's watching me.
See if they're like responding defensively or something. Or,
yeah. Or if they, are they grabbing their chips or are they pretending to watch the TV or
right.
What information can I gain right now when my hat is pointed down and it looks to everyone else like I'm staring at my chips, but I'm just watching them like a hawk.
I like the hat too, because you get a nice low hat and you can like watch people out of the corner, the top of it or whatever. Really.
Oh yeah.
I like that stuff, and I think it's just good. Even when you're not in a hand, you can just watch somebody, when they're making a big bet and not feel, like you're, making them uncomfortable or putting them on edge or anything.
Exactly. Yeah, they're not going to act any different because they don't believe that you're looking at them.
Right.
Yeah, the hat is like key because you can point it in a direction and people just assume you're looking there, but really,
right, you're looking at the other.
You're looking at the corner.
No, yeah, I like that stuff in theory, which is like I wish I could wear them more in cash games. It's not something I ever felt good about. I'd rather have I'd sacrifice I'd sacrifice the little bit of knowledge for having the friendly dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe, I didn't realize until now. Maybe that's one of the reasons I like tournaments. I like cash too, but mainly tournaments. I wanted to talk about a couple of tells. The waiting for action one, staring at you.
Mm-hmm.
I realized after listening to your book and watching the videos that Mike Carroll, in a sense, kind of had it right in that, he was saying if a player's staring at you that he's weak and, this is a guy that you want to bet into. But, you put it in a little bit more context and you're like, okay, well, you have to look at the situation. There's times where they're going to stare at you where it's more likely that they're strong. And there's times that they're going to stare at you where it's more likely that they're weak. Can you go over that?
Yeah, and just as a caveat for anybody who's new to this stuff, it's most of the things I write about are meant to be like player specific, so it's best to like get a sense of what their past behavior is like first, and there are some things that I would feel more comfortable like making cold reads about, but in general, I just wanted to say like it's about watching for patterns first and then acting on them and so whenever I talk about this stuff, I like to give that little, disclaimer first so people don't think I'm talking about like, this is always true, kind of thing. Because obviously there's a lot of variety. But,
that's basically the same speech that everyone gives before we start talking about Bitcoin, but you're in the clear.
You gotta have the legal disclaimer.
Yes, I'm not a financial advisor.
Don't sue me.
Well, you're a lot more of an expert than we are.
As long as you don't sue me for a read that goes wrong, it's all good. But yeah, for the categories, one of the things I did in the first book was separate tells into two main categories. Well, two of the main ones were waiting for action, which is, the behaviors that would be before somebody acts. So in other words, a waiting for action tell would be like the river comes and it's the first player's turn to act, and then the second player was waiting for the first player to act. So the second player, that would be waiting for action category. He's waiting for something to happen. He hasn't acted yet. So then the second major category was post bet. So after somebody makes a large, a significant bet, just because those two categories are so different. Like there's a big difference between somebody making how they act after making a big bet versus how they act when they're just, waiting for something to happen and they're more of the non-aggressor in the hand. So those were the two main categories I talked about in the first book. And I think it really makes a big difference for eye contact, staring type of tells, which I think are one of the most valuable kind of tells to look for, as long as you know what to look for. And I feel like, as you say, like there was this more kind of one size fits all kind of sense of like when someone's staring at you, they're weak. But it didn't differentiate between like the different situations that can come up, post bet versus waiting for action. So, so what I said in the book was, in general, somebody who's waiting for action and staring at you is weak. They're more on the defensive side. Obviously this could vary as we said, but we're talking general.
We're talking generalizations.
Right. Generalizations. And then, somebody who's made a big bet, it can also vary too, but in my experience, what I say is that actually looking at people after betting is more tied to strength, a strong hand, because it indicates relaxation. And you can see this a lot, and it makes sense when you think of it too, because somebody who's your average player, when they make a big bluff, kind of they don't want to be studied. They don't want to be examined. So they generally avoid eye contact. Whereas somebody who is more relaxed and making a big value bet, when they make a big value bet and they're relaxed, they make more eye contact. They enjoy interacting more with their opponent. So that's why I say that's a much different situation, and it pays. It's one of the most useful things to try to get a sense of for a specific player. So when somebody's making, one of the key things I look for in a game when I'm not in a hand or when I'm in a hand is, how are people acting after they make a significant bet? Where are they looking? Are their eye movements kind of fluid, or are they static? Because even more than staring or not staring or looking at or not looking at someone is how kind of fluid and relaxed their eye movements are. Like I'm much more likely to give someone credit for having a strong hand if they're looking, back and forth from the table to their opponent or whatever after they bet. So it's these kind of getting a sense of how someone acts after they make a big bet, and then correlating that with, were they strong or weak. All that stuff's very important. But I think, it's knowing where those categories are and thinking about it in those terms can really help, because I think a lot of people, kind of try to do this like, oh, he was staring at me in this other spot and he was weak, and now he's staring at me again in this different spot. And I still interpret that as weakness, where, thinking more about the categories gives you a lot more.
You're like, well, yeah, he was staring at you, but it was right after he bet. Now he's staring at you and he's waiting for you to see if you check your bet.
Yeah, much different.
The pattern is not the same.
Right.
And I never put that together before listening to your show or to your book, and I'm like, note to self, I'm excited to put this new knowledge to work.
Right. And that's what my books are all about. It's like trying to think of these factors, and obviously it can get quite complex because there's lots of factors in poker. It's like, for example, like to break this down even further, it's like, there's a difference between somebody who's first to act and thinking versus somebody who versus the person who's thinking as the first person, when the action's on the first person and the second person is thinking, like the order of things makes a difference. But the point is, it's just a matter of thinking about the different factors and trying to get a sense of what the factors are.
Yeah. There was an example you gave. You're on the button, and you said, here's an example. There's a limp, and then there's another limp, and a limp, and then a loose player raises. And then you say, I pause on the button, and I watch to see if everyone looks at me. And if they do, you're more likely to 3-bet there, right?
Yeah, that was in the first book. Yeah. Yeah, that was an example of like, for example, the first raiser. Usually, when a first raiser has a big hand, like let's say aces or kings,
Hmm.
they usually remain pretty inconspicuous. Like they don't want to accidentally present an obstacle to another person three betting. So they
Yeah.
usually just tend to be very keep to themselves and look down, or whatever, be very inconspicuous. So when if somebody raises and then I pause and then the original raiser looks at me for a little while, and I feel like they wouldn't do that if they had aces or kings. That makes me feel comfortable three betting light. So it's and I've used that in I think I used that in the tournament example. But yeah, I think that's in tournaments especially where people take their time more and there's more on the line in these pre-flop situations. I think it can be especially valuable. Those kind of things. It can be a deciding, not to say it's like something you should always do. It's more like if you're on the fence about doing it in the first place, that can be help put you over the top, in those spots. So it's just like adding a little bit more likelihood to you doing it, kind of like if you're on the fence about decisions pre-flop or
Yes, yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
exactly. If you're looking down at king queen there and you're like, oh, this is a good three bet spot, and then you kind of pause, and if he kind of starts tapping his shoulder or something and then looking at you, you probably have the green light.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about in the most recent book was these kind of more conspicuous behaviors. Then kind of attention-getting behaviors tend to make a pre-flop raiser's range weaker because people with the strongest hands tend to just remain calm and inconspicuous. So
Yes.
when you see a raiser doing weird things or like staring at you or it's moving around a lot, it makes me feel a lot better about three betting or whatever, or even calling as the situation may be.
Yeah. You got another section, sudden spontaneous outbursts on the flop. Can you talk about that?
Oh, right, like the verbal. Yeah, this is a pretty common tell, and it was one of the ones I included in the first book, which because it's just one of the more obvious verbal things is along the same lines actually of not wanting to draw attention to yourself early in a hand when you have a strong hand. When somebody connects well to the flop, like say they flop a set or a flush or whatever, there's an instinct to not draw attention to yourself when you're in that situation, and especially in the first few seconds after the flop comes out. But so sometimes you'll have people say something joking, or they'll yell out something about the flop right when it comes out, and that makes me feel very good in most cases about guessing that they don't have a strong hand that they missed, or just have a medium strength hand or whatever. It just makes me feel comfortable they didn't connect very well with it. Just because, early in a hand, especially when the pot's small, people have an instinct to not draw attention to themselves when they have very strong hands,
Yeah.
That's what that's about. So, I think I have a few examples in the verbal tells book about this kind of thing, and from real hands, it's like, some flop comes out and somebody's like, oh, there's those deuces we were just talking about, or whatever.
Yeah. Total unnecessary comments, but
Yeah. Just,
they're in the hand and they're talking. Yeah.
it shows, it shows a lack of focus too, is the other thing, like people who flop well, it's not just an instinct to remain inconspicuous. It's also a thoughtfulness, at least in the first few seconds. Like people are like, oh, what do I do here? Let me think about my plan, and that's kind of the case for early hand aces and kings, pre-flop, is like people are more thoughtful. They're like, what's my plan here? I want to get the max money out of this. What's my plan? And they're more mentally focused, which is why a lot of the more like odd or conspicuous behaviors pre-flop or early in a hand tend to weaken players' ranges because they're just not as thoughtful. They're not as mentally focused,
Yeah. I'm curious. I'm going to tease this, so don't answer right away. But what's the greatest read that you ever made? I mean, and this could be a read that you had for a year against a player that was at your casino, or one that you made in a big spot for a big pot that kind of tilted you one way or the other. But like, what's the greatest tell you ever spotted? And then
that's a good question.
Okay, but hang on, don't answer, Dan. Don't answer. We're going to tease it. You want to play poker with the fish? Join me at 64spades.com. They have low buy-in MTTs, cash games, nightly 1,500 guarantees, and on the weekends they got a 3K guarantee, and everything in between. They have dozens of satellites to win into the bigger tournaments, free rolls, and micro-buy-ins. I love this site. That was in all caps, by the way. No HUDs allowed, so the site is void of pros, and it's a honey hole of fish. You can even get rakeback by using the code HUPOKER, all caps. Deposit using crypto, PayPal, or even a credit card. 64spades.com, where the fish come to play. All right, Zach. So go ahead. What's the greatest read that you ever made?
I'll tell you one that's kind of interesting, which was like the most certain read I've ever had for a televised high stakes tournament.
Ooh, okay.
Was, and it's kind of, it's not really that surprising, but just the fact that I was so confident about it, and that I even tweeted in the moment, like when they were showing the 15-minute delay live stream, or 15-minute delay of the 2013 Heads Up WSOP main event. I tweeted, if Farber's bluffing here, I'll eat my hat.
You know what? I remember seeing that.
Yeah, that was like of all, because usually in these Heads Up tables, in these WSOP main event final tables, everybody's, for the last few years, everybody's been quite professional, especially because they had time to prepare. Everybody's been really buttoned down. And so it's pretty hard to find a really like, this is a super obvious. There's been a few, I could tell you about a few, but for the most part, it's most of the behavior is like, oh, it makes this a little bit more likely, I think, but this was just a clear case where I was so certain that he was bluffing. So I'll tell you the situation. It's not that surprising, and but basically he made a big bet on the river. Farber did, when they were heads up, and like a half hour before or something, Farber had made a big bluff in a similar spot. Like he had bet the turn and bet the river big, and he had been bluffing in that spot. And then like a half hour or an hour later, he made another big bet on the river. But this time he just had this really loose smile, where he looked like he was getting ready to laugh. Mm-hmm. And it just was super clear to me, like he would never act this loose and have such a genuine smile if he was bluffing. And he had a little tight smile on his face before when he was bluffing, which I was uncertain about because, small smiles are much more ambiguous and they could go either way. You could imagine them having a strong hand or a weak hand. But this one was such a clear cut case of somebody having a dynamic, kind of deep smile that was like affecting his eyes and stuff. And I was like, there's no way like he would ever look this loose if he was, value betting. So, it's kind of a standard, a pretty standard tell there, but just the fact that it was on such a big stage and I was so certain of it. And, I was kind of proud of that one just because I put my reputation of eating hats on the line for.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. That's great. After a book and everything. That's awesome.
Well, it was also interesting too, because the announcers, I was surprised that like Antonio didn't pick up on that, because they were like, oh, Antonio was like, I think he's bluffing here. I'm like, really? Like, this is the most clear thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's awesome, and that's why you've written books on it, and videos, and studied it, and it's just
not that I'm saying I read tells better than Antonio, but he's obviously got other things to think about in the moment too, and when he's doing commentating. But
that's a good one. I love it.
And I don't think Farber liked that, because I tweeted that afterwards, and I wrote a little. I included that part in an article I wrote about the final table, and Farber was like, I could have been bluffing there or something. It's like, nah, I don't think so.
Oh, that's great. Okay, what about here's a couple other tells. Playing with chips prior to action and shuffling cards when opponent is about to bet.
Right, playing with chips.
Prior to action. So, I guess it's kind of still that loosey-goosey, like not really too focused on the hand. If someone had aces there, they're probably not counting out chips before it's on them.
Right. It's kind of fitting in. Yeah, we're kind of dealing with similar themed tells here, because to me this is about the same kind of things I just talked about. It's like this lack of being mentally focused, this willingness to draw attention to yourself. Like for example, when I say you're in a tournament and you're in the hijack or something, and it comes around to you, and before you can act, you see the player on the button, reaching for chips or moving around in general. That to me just makes me feel that much more comfortable about raising there, because I don't think they're often going to be getting involved. And theoretically, if they do, I might feel comfortable, putting them on a weak hand, like if they raised me, if they three bet me after, reaching for their chips early and stuff, that's hardly ever going to be aces or kings from large majority of players. So theoretically, you could feel comfortable for betting them and knowing that aces and kings have become much less likely. Things like that. It's just noticing when players are making conspicuous movements, especially behind you, before action gets to them. Like another example is like a player behind you who, like, when the action comes to you and they like take a chip and like slam it down on their cards in some sort of like kind of ostentatious way, like expressing like a sort of an interest, like I'm interested in this hand,
Yeah, you don't want to raise here because I'm going to play.
Right. It's kind of like this. It can be quite subtle. It's not like they're acting big time. It's more like, and I had some examples of this in the video series of just, players in some fairly amateur players, just like, kind of slamming in a kind of an ostentatious, like, look at their cards and then like put a chip on their cards kind of ostentatiously. It just makes it that much more likely that they're, actually have a hand. They might have a hand they're actually interested in playing for sure, because they want to try to slow you down. But it's hardly ever going to be the strongest hands.
Yeah, exactly. Now, going back to pre-flop, can you talk about raise speeds? A quick raise versus kind of a paused, like a long raise.
Oh, pre-flop?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this one can vary a lot, because a lot of people are just more quick than other people. So it's good to get a sense of people's general tendencies first. But in general, if somebody raises quickly, I'm more likely, they're more likely to have a weaker hand, or more, the better way to say it is aces and kings and the strongest hands, queens plus probably have become less likely because, for the same reasons we've been talking about, they like to put on people with aces and kings like to put on a little show of thoughtfulness, even if they're not consciously, putting on an act. It's like, I don't want to act immediately and scare people off with my aces or kings. I want to think about it a little bit, So the longer pauses can be tied to, that can be a little bit more scary than like somebody who like immediately three bets you or whatever. That's basically it.
Yeah. Right on. Early talking from a caller. And I wrote here, only unprovoked talk is probably not a strong hand.
Right. Similar to how we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Imagine
call, I just call, like this unnecessary speaking.
Yeah, unnecessary speaking. Like, you raise pre-flop, you get one caller who limped in or something or whoever behind you, and they're like, I'll call you, or or just even saying, I think I even tied it to just saying the word call can be an indicator that they're not laying a trap for you or something.
You could probably take sets out of his range.
Right. Yeah. Stuff like that. Yeah. It's like it makes the strongest hands less likely, because people who are laying a trap for you and calling are going to tend to be very quiet and inconspicuous. They don't want to put an obstacle up. Whereas people who are on the more defensive have this kind of motivation to verbalize in a defensive way, even if they don't know that's what they're doing. They're like, I call, or just call. They verbalize because it expresses some confidence in the situation, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a small factor, and it's not to say like it's not a big factor. It just makes it a slightly more likely. Like, for example, like it might make me, if I was on the fence about following up with a bluff on the turn, the fact that they said call on the flop, would put me in the camp, or put me over the edge to make that bet if I was on the fence in the first place.
Yep. There's a really good example that you have in the video series, and it's at a tournament where Chris Moneymaker is playing, but the player we're studying is to his direct left. And he's a white gentleman, probably in his mid-40s, maybe 50 years old. And you have two examples, and you have one where he has a strong hand, and then you have another one where he's got a medium strength hand, something like Queen Jack. I can't remember what it is. But in the first one, he's got aces. And Chris raises. I think he makes it like 3x or something. And then this guy counts out a call. And then after that, he doesn't. He does take his time, just like you say. and then he kind of puts his head like in his hands, like his head or his chin in his hands, and he doesn't look at the action behind him. He's just like staring straight forward, you know.
Right, not
And
at
then
all.
in the one where he's got Queen Jack or Jack 10 or whatever he had, Chris raises to 3x, and then he's kind of bopping around, and then he grabs his chips and counts out a call and tosses them out, and then, you know, he looks to the guy to his left to see what he's going to do, and it's such a, I mean, I'm a visual learner, and that was such a perfect example of it. You couldn't find a better one, you know what I mean? It's the same two
Right.
players.
It was great that that's what I like about that. I wish I had more stuff like that because, it's actually with that Chicago footage I use, they do have a lot of the same players, but, obviously there's not that much footage. So it's kind of like, but it's great when you can find, the same player in the exact same spot. That's great.
Yeah,
Like
it was perfect.
Running a simulation or something.
You know, I bet you could probably get in touch with a college that has some type of biometrics machines and stuff and tell them about this, and they could run a study, and you could get a book out of it and a video series. I mean, it would be freaking awesome.
I've had that idea. I just never followed through on it. Like I know there's there's people that have that machinery. I mean, you could theoretically get a grant for it or something.
Yeah, as long as it's a win-win for both of you, then yeah,
I might, now that you reminded me about that, because I had that idea a few years ago when, before I got kind of burnt out on this stuff, and so I should think about that some more. I definitely think it's doable. It's just a matter of setting all the parameters and stuff up right, and it'd be very interesting. Yeah.
It would, and I bet you could probably. What's that thing where they got to do when you go high enough up in education? It's like their doctorate or something. They got to do a thesis. Is that what it is?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I bet you could find a student that has access to this stuff, and that would be his thesis, and that would be.
Get a poker playing college student and have him do all the work, and then
you just have him play. Yes, it'd be awesome. Let's see. Okay. Oh, as far as in the strong categories, I love this one by amateurs. I mean, Mike Caro's videos exaggerated quite a bit because he had to hire actors, and like that. But when an amateur kind of grabs some chips and he kind of shrugs his shoulders and throws the chips out like, I guess I'll bet.
Yeah. The shrugging gestures are great. I wrote about that in Exploiting Poker Tales too, and I have the whole one whole video on it. But in general, like, because the shrugging is pretty obvious, like it's over the top. But then you got these like lesser, more subtle versions of shrugging where it's just like they'll just slightly turn one hand upward, in kind of a slight like palms up shrugging gesture. You kind of see that a lot more because it's a more subtle like.
Yes.
I mean, they're not even aware they're doing it or something. It's like this. And I had a few examples, I think, in the video, that one video of like people just making a slight palms up gesture when they put the chips in. And there's also like, obviously the shoulder shrug is super obvious. But I think, the one thing to think about there is like there can be some variety for that earlier in a hand, because you will see like some players who will do shrug things when they shove pre-flop. And they actually do have a weaker hand. It's almost like because they want to convey like, I don't really care about this because I'm so strong.
Yeah.
So I think mostly that kind of thing is like more useful for like later in the hand, like when the hand's more defined, because pre-flop there can be a lot of ambivalence. Like people are like, oh, I got Jack 10 suited, I'll just shove in. And, I'm not that far behind most people. So there's a lot more ambivalence pre-flop, which is something to really keep in your mind, because it helps explain some of the weirder behaviors that people do after shoving pre-flop or betting big pre-flop, which, if you would see them later in the hand from a player making a big river bet, you'd be like, oh, that's almost certainly, them being relaxed and strong. Whereas like pre-flop, you don't have that same confidence just because there's a lot of ambivalence pre-flop.
Yeah. Another one you talk about too is early in a hand when a player's like laughing and smiling. They're more likely to have the weaker hands. The one I love is when you get like an amateur that checks his big blind and he's kind of talking to his neighbor and they're giggling and, he checks the flop checks through and some inconsequential deuce comes out and all of a sudden he stops talking and he's paying attention.
Laser focused. Yeah.
Those ones are good. You're like, okay, somebody hit their set or their gut shot or whatever just went out there.
I think about one specific hand, 5-10, I played recently where everybody was, exactly like that. Everybody was laughing on the flop. And then, all of a sudden, like some player in late position when the turn comes just gets like deadly silent, and like the smile, his laugh and smile just kind of like fade away.
You're like, okay, I guess my overpair is no good.
Somebody got really focused there.
Yes, yes. Snap calls. In the book, you call them immediate calls. These are much more likely to be a medium strength or a weaker hand than it would be if they're. I feel like when someone snap calls me, they're. It's probably wrong, but I always think like, oh, they got like middle pair or they're on a draw because they're like trying to slow me down.
Right,
You know?
right. Uh-huh. Yeah, and that's generally what it means. I mean, like, people snap call you a normal size bet on the flop. It's hardly ever going to be a strong hand because, as it's kind of obvious that with strong hands, they are going to, they have an incentive to think more about it, like how to maximize, their win, and they want to think about it more. They want to strategize more, like what's the best way to play it. And it's pretty rare. Yeah, pretty rare. You see somebody like flop a set and then just snap call somebody, or whatever. Flop a strong. Yeah.
Yep. Double checking hold cards. So post flop, the flops come out. The action's not quite to him. So before he bets, he double checks his hold cards.
Right. That is in the same way we've been talking about with drawing attention to yourself from a waiting to act player who has not made a bet. It's those kinds of conspicuous behaviors will weaken their range, like just because, usually somebody who's flopped really well doesn't like to draw attention to themselves. They'll usually know that they flopped very well, and they're not going to conspicuously look at their cards. I mean, the more inconspicuous it is, the more it can become more likely that they did flop a strong hand. But usually, it's going to mean that, somebody who knows they flopped a set doesn't have much incentive to check back. They actually have an incentive to not draw attention to themselves. And it's especially meaningful for like the few seconds after the flop, just like in the same way we talked about drawing attention verbally to the flop or something is tied to weaker hands. Yeah. But and then it's worth pointing out, maybe you were going to follow up, but then people who double check their cards after, before or after making a significant bet is going to be more tied to strong hands, because that's a totally different situation. Sort of like we talked about before, like waiting for action is much different than somebody who's making a big bet. You'll double checking your cards before or during or after making a big bet is a clue that this player's relaxed, because bluffers generally, it's pretty rare to see a bluffer double check their cards when they're making a significant bluff, because it does imply, most people's interpretation of a double check is like, oh, they had to double check their cards. It's maybe they're not certain what they had. So that's something that bluffers don't like to do. Yeah. So I found, I have very few examples of bluffers double checking their cards. It does happen, of course, but it's just quite rare. And I have tons of examples of players value betting, double checking their cards.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one I was curious about. So, like, we've talked quite a bit about tells, and I'm curious what the number one. I'm going to tease this one again, Zach. But what's the number one tell that you found in your experience to be the most reliable? Tired of playing great poker for 8 hours and then tilting it all away on one hand? Elliot Rowe. I will not play a hand of poker unless I listen to that man's voice first. Meditation tapes just before you play. Get in the right mindset so you can focus on poker. Listen to an MP3 before you play. You put it right on your phone, your computer, your tablet. He has MP3s for everything. Live cash, online MTTs, post-game cooldown, the Mindset Booster package, which comes with 5 MP3s. Confidence, motivation, recovery, volume, study booster, the simple volume system. Try it for free. There's no obligation. Listen to his 7-minute tilt buster. It's free from me to you. This is the next step in poker, the Mindset Advantage by Elliot Rowe. Use the code HUPOKER, score yourself a discount. All the links are in the show notes. Elliot Rowe. Okay, Zach, so what's the number one most reliable tell that you've found?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because is it by most reliable? I mean, there's things that are most reliable, but then are hardly ever happen. It's so it's kind of like, should I pick something that's more practically important? Like
Okay, how about the
yeah,
most common and the
common,
most reliable?
most reliable and common, good balance there. Yeah. Um, uh, let's see. I would definitely put immediate calls up there. I'll just
Okay.
mention that one because that's like a super common one, and that's one of the few ones you can use online too. I mean, like probably the really
Yeah.
that's one of the only um, things you can use online really. But
Yeah.
I would say I like to say eye contact stuff is in general is some of the most meaningful stuff. Like looking how people use their or move their eyes after making a significant bet. I mean, that's one of the things I always tell people, like that should be one of the main things you focus on, because first of all, because it's focusing on when they're making significant bets, which doesn't happen too often. So it's not like it's going to wear you out to study it. And it's just one of the most important parts. Like if you can get a good read on somebody and you have a good sense of when they're value betting and versus bluffing, that's very important, and what happens a lot for more amateur players is like their eyes are just much more loose after making a value bet versus when they're bluffing, they're just like staring in one place. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, I mean, I think that one above all is worth taking notes on, on your phone. It's like, when you see some big hands go down versus players you think you're going to be playing with, for the rest of the day or even, more than that, regular players. I think that's a very good thing to keep track of is just, what were they doing? And, obviously you don't always get to see the result, but when you do, that's.
When you do, it's gold. Yeah. Yeah. I can't talk enough about your videos. I love how like after one of the examples, you'll circle the player that we're supposed to watch in yellow, and then we'll watch it, and then you'll say what you saw, and I'm like, oh, he did, huh? And then you go, let's watch this again, and then you repeat. That's perfect, man, because I would have had to press the back,
Oh, right.
reverse so many times because it's like, I'll be damned, he did sit up in his seat. Oh,
Yeah.
look at that! He is staring at the original razor.
Trying to make it easy, yeah, because I thought
Yeah.
it'd be annoying if I was like, yeah, go back and watch it again yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing that you said at the end of your book, and it was really a sobering point for me, is you said, "This is just to put it in perspective. This is how much you could be outmatched. Good players are watching you and know how to read you. If you're going to play this game, it's important to become as unreadable as possible." And so, in summary, you said, to do that, do the same thing every time. You want to be consistent and you want to be unreadable. You want to have your eye contact to be consistent. The same motion every time when you're betting. And you even said that you'll pause for 3 seconds before every decision.
Unless I know I'm gonna fold pre-flop, that's the one time I would act immediately. But yeah, in any normal spot where I'm actually involved in the hand, I like to pause for a few seconds just to give myself some balance of not acting too quickly. Yeah. But
yeah, I think that's brilliant. You also talk a little bit about Harrington on Hold'em. I love those books. I got 3 of them. All 3 of them I've read them probably 3 times. I bought my mom a copy, but you're right. His section on tells was really. I remember he said he doesn't really watch the person; he watches their hands, and I'm like, I tried that for a long time. I couldn't really get anything out of it. And after going through your courses, I think it's important to kind of take in the whole picture as a whole and watch the whole person. And one thing I really like to do too is if they've like moved all in and I have a decision, and I like to kind of get them talking, and if I hope at this point I kind of know at least where everyone's from at the table and maybe something about their job, and I'll try to kind of get them like talking, and I'll be like, Sweden, what are you doing here? Come on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Phil Hellmuth approach.
Yeah, any reaction,
Or Negreanu does that too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you can get someone to like crack a smile, then that will tell you so much information.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
I think that's why you see a lot of that from people like Negreanu and Helmuth and other people. There is value. Not to say you should do it all the time, but yeah, there definitely is value for trying to get some information out of people. Like you can tell a lot. I mean, a lot of the examples, the verbal examples in my book come from when people are like being kind of manipulated on to talk more in those spots, and giving away information when they do. uh,
yeah,
yeah, it's definitely, I mean, and I like to say, like you said, like the main reason to I think the main reason to read my stuff or watch my videos is like it's not so much about reading other people, which is that's obviously part of it. It's mainly about making sure you're not leaking information yourself and feeling good that you're not, feeling confident that you're not leaking information in important spots. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. A couple of tips you gave was you said study the loosest players first. I imagine that's because they're more likely to be in pots, and therefore, they're more times than not they're going to be involved, and so there's going to be more action.
Yeah, there's more information to be gathered because they're more involved more, and then you're more often going to face them in hands. So yeah, just more information and more chance to use it. Yeah.
Yeah, try not to overload yourself when you're first doing this by watching everyone. Just pick one player and make it the loosest player because you're most likely going to be involved with him, and see if you can, start gathering intel.
Right. Yeah. I think it's important to not beat yourself up for not gathering information. I mean, it's just there's just so much information you can't get all of it. It's like, I mean, it's like even when I'm playing, I'm like, I'll often be like, oh, I haven't looked at that source of information for a long time. I should have been watching that. It's got there's just too much stuff, and it's kind of like the more experience you have, the better you get at learning what works for you and what you're good at noticing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's a lot of information out there is the moral of the story, and every once in a while, even if you're skeptical about tells, like you talked about Harrington, it's like I can understand being skeptical and hardly ever using them, but then there's just times where it's just so clear, like if you're never using them, that's a real loss, because even if you only relied on them the times that they were super clear and like near 100% probability or reliability, it's like that would be a significant source of information, in big spots. It's like, and I had an article. It was like kind of a response to like Doug Polk, who has said kind of critical things about tells. I mean, he's logical about it too. He acknowledges that they can be important, but this was a kind of a piece in response to like one specific thing he said, and then like thinking about, even if you felt skeptical about tells, it's like I could show you many examples of like tells that are like clear cut and almost 100% reliability in certain spots, from specific real world televised hands. And I could be like, I would say,
Oh yeah, the one with Chris
you,
Moneymaker where he raised and the guy, he showed aces and Queen Jack offsuit. Like
yeah, or like that, or like the big smile from Jay Farper one we talked about. It's like even if you only used the ones that I think are near certain probability, even if you only use those, that's still a great source of information. And
that's a huge edge. Yeah, cool. Well, I really want to throw out a thank you to Jacob Triba. He was the one that put me in contact with you, and
cool.
I also he asked me to mention, and I'm curious. He said, mention this to Zach. He said, fake social media accounts.
Yeah.
What does he mean by that?
Oh, just I've done a good amount of research into fake Facebook accounts, like fake American, imitating Americans accounts, which are, yeah, and some of the work I did wrote about in the New York Times article about fake social media accounts. So if you look at my Twitter account, I have an article pinned to the top about something I wrote about, just examining some of the many fake American Facebook accounts, basically.
Okay.
It's just these people, and the crazy thing about it is there's these fake accounts that steal the actual names and pictures of real Facebook accounts. So I've actually notified a lot of real people that, look, there's a doppelganger of you using your pictures and name. Just kind of crazy. And people
Awesome.
People need to be more skeptical. I always tell people, like, Google your name on Facebook. Somebody might have a fake version of you on there.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, if you guys want to follow Zach Elwood on Twitter, you can do so at a poker player, and it's spelled just like it should be. No abbreviations or nothing. At a poker player. You can get check out his website and everything. It's pretty awesome. He's got a blog with a bunch of free videos, and you can sign up for a free newsletter where you'll get a whole bunch of articles and videos at readingpokertells.com and readingpokertells.video. Well, thank you for coming on, Zach. This was a
Thanks,
lot of fun.
Appreciate
And you guys stay tuned for the strategy section, and I'll tell you how you can get Zach's video prize.
Thanks, Steve.
Tired of bagling tournament after tournament? Start winning tournaments. Join me at Tournament Poker Edge and start playing like a professional. Watch the videos, post tough hands in the forum, and get a response from Andrew Brokus. It's free coaching from a pro who's been making a living playing poker for over a decade. Train your brain to make the right decisions automatically and start winning money. Tournament poker is one of the fastest evolving games there is. It's always changing. Bet sizing, donk betting, ace and king blockers, you have to stay on top of it if you want to win, and TPE is the answer. When you join, get the discount with the code HUP month, HUP quarter, or HUP year. Study and learn with me and other people that are just like you and me. TournamentPokerEdge.com. If you'd like to purchase any of Zach's books, the links are in the show notes. Okay, we have a hand from a listener, Reynard. Reynard and I went to school together, and he's a dealer at our local card room, and he was on the show a couple of years ago. Okay, so Reynard writes in, he says, hey Steve, here's another hand I played terrible, and I'd like to get your opinion on. I've talked to several people about it and got a mixed answer, so I thought I'd send it in. Playing the 240 daily tournament at the Aria Las Vegas the Saturday before New Year's. We're 4 away from the money. My table broke and we're down to 2 tables. We've played about 20 minutes at this table. We're at 2K, 4K, 300 ante. Under the gun makes it 12K. This is a 50-year-old man who has been very active, mostly pre-flop. And the way Reynard explained it, I talked to him on the phone. He said that this guy, was raising really wide. And I said, well, how wide is wide? Under the gun, is he doing that with like queen jack off suit? And he said, oh yeah. I'm like, okay. So this guy has a pretty wide range from under the gun, making it 3 big blinds. Now he has a stack of 200K, which equates to 50 big blinds. It folds to the hijack, who shoves for 60K. Now he's got 15 big blinds. So 50 big blind opens to 3 big blinds, and then the hijack shoves for 15 bigs. Okay? It says it's a young kid under the age of 25. I've only played with these 2 players for the last 20 minutes. They just moved broke the tables. They're down to 2. Okay? I'm in the cutoff with 10-10 and 175K. Both the button and the blinds have around 100K. And under the gun, the original opener, he's got 200K. So 260, we got 175, and the 3 behind us have 100. Let me discuss real quick the option of calling. Hijack shoves for 15 big blinds. That's 15. If we just call 15 big blinds, that leaves us 30. Let's assume the button and the blinds fold, and it gets back to the hijack. Now, if he shoves, we're really in between a rock and a hard spot, because we've got 32 big blinds in there, and then we got to call another 30. Our odds, we're going to have to call, I believe. I just don't see how we can be getting such good odds and then have to and then fold. I think Carlos might argue that, since we're getting such good odds and he shoves, that means that we can fold. But I don't know. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to say the 2 options are going to be to either shove or to fold. So it's on us with tens. Let's throw in some ranges here. Okay, so for the under the gun player with 200K, I threw in ranges of, after talking with Reynard, it sounds like he's pretty loose. I asked him any pair. He said, yeah. Okay, so we have all pairs. We have all suited aces. If he's doing that with queen jack off, then I think he's looking down at a suited ace. We'll throw those in. I have all suited broadways, and I do not have jack 10 off, queen 10 off, or king 10 off, but I have ace king off through ace 10 off, and like that. So that comes out to 18%. Player 2, now from his perspective, he's got 15 big blinds, 4 before the money. He's one of the shorter stacks. I think he's doing that here with the way Reynard described it. He's doing it probably sevens plus. Ace king suited, ace queen suited, ace jack suited, ace king off, ace queen off, and I threw in king queen suited as well. And that equates to about 6%. Then we've got pocket tens. So how do we perform against that range of hands? Just some quick numbers here. Player 1 is 26. Player 2, the hijack, is 37, and we're 37. But what we really need to know is the under the gun razor is folding very often when we shove here. We do have to worry about 3 players behind us with 100K. They're not going to bust us, but that would be a significant dent to our stack. So that's a consideration. The guy under the gun, I believe he's only calling. Reynard said, my thinking, if I shove, I think I can get under the gun to fold ace king, ace queen, ace jack, and king queen type hands and isolate, possibly knock out a player, and have a big stack. Okay, I think it's a little ambitious to think he'll fold ace king there. Maybe he would in that spot. I mean, he doesn't want to go down to 25K and only have a few big blinds, but maybe not, But you say possibly knock out a player and have a big stack. When we look at the overall numbers here, we kind of are a big stack. We've got 45 big blinds, and we're only 4 away from the money. That is a big stack. So if we go here and if we get it in, we're hoping here that under the gun fold, that the blinds and the button fold, and that the under the gun, the original razor folds, and that we just get heads up with the 60K. So let's say that happens and we get heads up with the hijack for 60K. Okay, so running the numbers against the hijack and tens, you can take sevens out and eights out, or you can take the king queen out and maybe leave the sevens, and it comes right about down to 50-50. And the edge is usually in his favor. It's closer to 51-49. So in one aspect, that's kind of good because we have a lot of dead money in there. We've got the 3 big blinds from the original opener, and we got the 2 from the blinds and antes. So we're kind of free rolling there. We're getting an extra 2.5 big blinds in this exchange from the dead money, which is good. But to go from 45 big blinds to 65 if we win is a good result. But to go from 45 big blinds down to 30 big blinds if we lose, which is going to happen half the time, is not great. So that's one factor. Another factor, too, is the under the gun. Okay, he is under the gun, and yeah, he is loose. So I put it in a range that equated to 18% of the time he's calling us, and 82% of the time he's folding. So the 82% of the time that he's folding, which is most of the time, we get an extra 12K that we now split with the hijack. So we're actually only getting 6K in that exchange. The 18% of the time that he does call, though, we're performing horribly against that range. I plug that one in as premium hands. So jacks plus, jacks might even be a stretch. I put ace king suited, ace king off, and possibly like a 50% weight on ace queen suited. We're not doing too well against that. We're 34 to 66, so we only win 1 out of 3 times. And when we lose, we're out of the tournament. Yeah, when we do win this exchange, it's great because we got, $350K, more actually, if we knock out the short stack as well. But yeah, I was talking with Raynard on the phone, and after running the math and the numbers, I really don't think this is a call, especially being so close to the money. We've got a big stack as it is. To go from 45 big blinds to over 100 if we win is a good result. But to go from 45 big blinds to 0 and get knocked out of the tournament 4 before the money when we're a big stack is, man, that just sucks. It's such a bummer. I like a fold here, although it is so close, this was a tough one. I spent a while plugging the numbers in and doing the math, and thank you for the hand, Raynard. Okay, results. Raynard says, I shove, folds to under the gun, who mucks face up, ace jack off. Okay, hijack has ace king, flop is king queen 9, and I don't improve. Darn it, we couldn't hit a jack, huh? Okay, well, thank you, Raynard. Thank you for submitting that to the show. And if you guys want to win Zach's video series, here's what you do. Go to headsuppoker.poker and click on the Submit a Hand tab. And submit a hand live, online, whatever, doesn't matter, tournament, cash, and write in. Now, write the most details you can. You guys know how I love details, and put what the villain looked like, how old he was, any tells you might have had on him, stack sizes, blind levels, all of that. Okay? If you enjoy the show and would like to support us, you may do so. Running the show each and every week is not free. My editor, Andrew, and his wife, Julie, need to eat. Bandwidth has to be paid for, and all sorts of development and background costs. Go to headsuppoker.poker, click on the Support Us tab, and create a bookmark in your computer or your phone for Amazon. So any purchase that you make, a small percentage of that will get kicked back to the pod, and it's no extra cost to you, and we keep this train running. Another thing that I would love you to do, and it's very helpful, is to rate and review us from whatever outlet you're listening on. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Libsyn, Mixcloud, Player FM, Spreaker, PokerFuse, Podbean, Hold'em Radio, Google Play, all the outlets. Rate and review us on there. Give us a 5-star review, and write something in the show, in the notes. I'll read it on the show. You can donate to the podcast from our Support Us page, and if you donate $40 or more, you'll get a free Heads Up Poker podcast hat. Thank you for spreading the word. Thank you for telling your friends about the show. Thank you for being here each and every week, and thank you for tuning in. Here is your weekly motivational speech.
I wish I didn't take life so seriously. I wish I didn't take life so seriously. I wish I didn't take life so seriously. I wish I lived more. I wish I gave more happiness to my family. I wish I knew how precious life was, how fleeting, how special, and at the same time fragile and insignificant. I wish I didn't give up on my dreams so easy. One day, life will flash before your eyes. Make sure it's worth watching. When we look back on our life, in our last breaths, we will all wonder, did my life mean anything? Did my life mean anything to this world? Was I loved? Did I have an impact on anyone else's life? Did I matter? We won't be worried about our bills. We won't be worried about our hair. We certainly won't care about our favorite TV show. We won't spare a second thought of others' opinions and judgments. Did I matter? Before you reach that last breath, today might be the time to make a change. Make your life matter. One day, it will be over. There will be 2 dates, either side of a dash. Make sure that dash is not empty. Make sure it is full of life, full of living. Oscar Wilde once said, "To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all." And he was right. Don't live like everyone else. Existing. Be extraordinary. Live every moment with passion and wonder. Don't take anything or anyone for granted. What is important to you? What dreams do you have? Go get them. What are you waiting for? You only have one shot. If you miss the target, at least you will live with pride, knowing you have no regrets. Who do you love?